What I want to talk about today are some of the challenges facing political parties, the relationship between party building in the current climate and social movements, and suggest a little bit of a way forward. We're going to have a really good panel discussion next and get input from a wide variety of perspectives on that, but I want to introduce a little bit about my perspective on that. So, the first thing I always like to start talking about any of these things is a kind of reminder, and I apologize if this is kind of wonky, nerdy, political science stuff, but I think it's important for us to remind ourselves what parties are, what they're for in a democracy, what role they play in a democratic society, which I think is very crucial. I think that parties are a central, fundamental institution, pillar of democracy, and without them, I really can't conceive of a truly democratic political system. So, first thing is, this is a kind of adaptation of the standard political science model of what a party is. A party is an organization, right? It's membership, it's structures, it's local clubs and district organizations, etc. The party is also, of course, our voters, the people who we can convince to vote for us in the electorate. It's a set of ideas or policy preferences out amongst voters. It's also, of course, a team of people in government, right? It's the social democratic group in the Riksdag. It's the liberals sitting in the city government, right? It's a team of people who work together in government in order to advance an agenda. And all of these things in different ways interact with one another. And in a sense, you could describe the structure of any party by describing how those three factors interrelate and fit with one another, right? You have some political parties that are very top-down, where the party in government really decides everything. The members of parliament are really the party. Membership doesn't really matter, right? That's very common for conservative and liberal parties throughout Europe. Excuse me. And then you have parties that are more democratic, where the party structure and the membership is more powerful, gets to decide who the candidates are, what the party program is, etc. Right? And then you have parties in which it's really just an appeal to voters, and there's no real ideological mission or coherence or political position. It's just a team of folks who go out to voters and say, vote for us, put us back in office. But one of the great things about working particularly in Nordic countries and with Scandinavian social democratic parties, right, is that there's this other dimension, this social movement dimension, this idea that the point of politics is to engage people, to allow them to get involved in society, to change society. And this social movement aspect cuts across all of the other parts of the party, right? We have social movement activism out there amongst voters. We hopefully are recruiting from social movements to choose our candidates and the people that we're going to put into power and make the team in government. And hopefully our party organization, our structures, are open to, influenced by, and responsive to social movements. Hopefully, I say, because that's what it looks like on paper, but doesn't always work out in real life. So look, parties are obviously a great tool for winning elections, right? It's good to have an organization, it's good to have people out there to campaign, it's good to have an infrastructure. It's obviously crucially important for getting things done. I mean, if you could imagine an entire parliament of independents and how hard that would be to get a budget passed if every single member was an independent with no party group, right? That would be a nightmare. A complete inefficient way to try to come to decisions. But it's also, I think the most important thing about parties is that it's an avenue for participation by regular people. It's another layer of democracy out there in the world. You can, as a party activist, come and get involved, say your piece, fight for your issues, fight for your interests. That goes into the party program, and the party program, hopefully, you win, and that goes into law and enacted in actual social change. So parties are a very, very important tool for regular people to get power in society, to get power in government, to have an influence over their government. And here's why. Here's the thing that we forget about the important thing about politics, or about parties rather, is that parties keep politics political. Sounds like a cute, weird phrase, right? I mean, isn't all politics always political? Well, no. One of my main points today is that there are many forces in our society trying to take the politics out of politics. To make politics about personalities, about individuals, about style, about culture, about things that are not about policies, that are not about law, that are not about social questions. If we elected people without parties, and we do this in the United States at many levels of government, then when we go to voters and we say, vote for me, I'm just the best guy, I drink the same kind of beer that you drink, I'm like you, then you give me basically what we'd say is a blank check, right? An open mandate. Yeah, we'll vote for you, we like you, you're like us, go to Washington, go to the Capitol, do whatever you want. We have no idea. It's through parties that me as a candidate, I go to voters and I say, well, I'm a Democrat, and a voter knows that that means, at least in theory, that I'm going to be for the labor movement, that I'm going to be for women's rights, that I'm going to be for environmental protection, that I'm going to have a set of values. So in that sense, that's how that voter gets to have a direct influence over the policies of government. Because I've made a promise as a candidate to that voter that they can predict how I'm going to behave once I win because I've joined a party. I'm part of a party. I'm running as part of a party campaign. And without these strong parties that go to voters and say, you may not know everything about this person that you're voting for parliament. You don't know it, you can't look into their soul and know everything about them. You know this incredibly important thing about them. They're a social democrat versus a liberal. We know we have some reasonable expectation of what a social democratic government is going to be for. That's how we empower average people and voters to have an input in politics. But if they can't participate, and if the parties don't stand for something, if parties get into office and don't do the things that they said they were going to do, then we've blown that system up. We've undermined this crucial pillar of democracy. And look, there's no doubt about it. Parties right now throughout the democratic world are in crisis, and I don't have time to go through all of the reasons for that. Right? Parties have been in decline, meaning fewer voters being loyal to parties, fewer people joining political parties. That process is a little slower in the Nordic countries than in other parts of the world, but it's still happening here. And obviously, a big part of that is the decline of people voting based on a class identity. Right? We can no longer count on the idea that everybody who works for a wage is probably going to vote for us. Right? We've become far more disconnected from voters. An analogy that I like to use, and we'll talk about at the end, is that we've turned politics from a sport that we're playing, that everybody gets involved in, and everybody joins a team and is out on the field. We've turned it into a spectator sport. We maybe stand on the sidelines and cheer for the team. Oh, I hope the Social Democrats win. But we do it as passive observers instead of as players on the field. And obviously we have competition as parties from social movements. If you're a young person in Sweden and you're like, yeah, the world's messed up, I want to change the world, I want to do something. You have a whole range of options that you could choose to put your time into before it would even occur to you to join a political party. Right? You can get involved in an issue organization. You can get involved in a community group. You can fight directly for the issues that are meaningful to you. And lastly, we have this challenge coming from what I think incorrectly is referred to as populism. Right? We feel like we're under attack as political parties from these populist upsurges. And I want to talk in a little bit about why I think populism is the wrong frame to think about this threat. And It's also, we have to be honest, in addition to a general crisis of parties, all parties across the political spectrum are suffering, right? We saw in the election in Germany that just happened, which was a historic catastrophe for the Social Democrats. Unfortunately, yet another historic catastrophe. They keep sort of upping the ante about how bad it can get. But it was also a terrible election for Merkel. It was a terrible election for the CDU. It just was less terrible than it was for us, so they win, right? Parties all over the political spectrum are seeing membership declines, a decline in voter loyalty, etc. But it's especially striking what is happening to the left. In a time where, and I think any historian would say, this should be objectively a tremendous opportunity for parties of the left. Economic inequality and economic insecurity growing, more and more salience on our social values, right? More and more popularity amongst young people for our positions on social issues like women's rights, LGBT rights, and the environment, etc. We should be winning, but it's the opposite. This is a map put out by the think tank associated with the Party of European Socialists, sort of outlining right now where do we stand in terms of elections in Europe. The red are social democratic parties, the blue conservative, the yellow liberal parties. And as you can see, this map looks bad, right? And it's going to get worse. Like Austria is still red. I think as we speak, we're losing Austria. I don't even know if we want to count Slovakia, frankly, with the way the government is there. But it's basically Portugal, Sweden, Romania, kind of Italy. That's it. That's it for progressive governments in Europe. If we broaden this to the rest of the world, of course, we've had this catastrophe in the United States, which everyone's focused on the presidency, which of course is just a tremendous embarrassment. But the fact is, Republicans control all of Congress. They have a majority in the Supreme Court, and they control state government in a very, very large majority of states. This is the most right-wing governance in the history of the United States right now. Total catastrophe. We also have the rise of some horrific authoritarian politics in places like the Philippines. And in India, right? The left is in retreat exactly at a time where we should be moving forward and advancing.
Excuse me, why is Greece brown?
Greece is brown because it's actually not brown, it's like a dark red. And it's so the one state where a member party of one of the far left fractions in the European Parliament is, so that's the Syriza government. Okay. So this is a provocative question that I think gets at the heart of a lot of what I'm talking about. It was really striking to me in 2016 how much the primary fight between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton resonated throughout the left and center left all over the world. My Facebook feed for basically the entire year was this running death battle about the American Democratic primary in English, Swedish, Spanish, Norwegian, German, right? All kinds of people piling in. It was really fascinating to watch how people read their own debates in their own parties onto this battle we were having in the Democratic Party in the United States. So which one of these candidates was the Social Democrat in that? Bernie? Well, I think so, but fact is there were lots and lots and lots of social democratic leaders and activists throughout the world that were like, no, Hillary Clinton is the social democrat. Now, obviously when it comes to policy, this is an easy question, right? I mean, Bernie Sanders, frankly, would be very comfortably right in the middle, even in the center right, within any social democratic party, virtually any social democratic party in Europe. His policies are not particularly radical from a social democratic perspective. Free college, we shouldn't bomb other countries indiscriminately, people should have free health care, stuff that has been a mainstream social democratic set of policies or values for decades. But what was striking to me was how often I heard people say, oh, but Bernie that's left populism, that's not social democracy. Clinton is the social democrat because she's responsible, She will never promise more than she could give. She's reasonable and pragmatic. That's what social democracy is. It was almost as if it wasn't about policy or even values, but what people recognized as social democracy was being boring, being incremental. It was like the fact that Bernie Sanders could fill a stadium with screaming, excited young people meant he couldn't possibly be the social democrat. No. If it's a social democrat, it must be a bunch of older voters who are bored and being responsible. Look, political responsibility and pragmatism are good political values, don't get me wrong. It's why I'm a social democrat, as opposed to in some other political family. But that can't be the core of what we're about. Responsibility and pragmatism is not going to refill our movement. It doesn't light a fire under anyone. It doesn't make someone commit to a lifetime of activism and identifying with our movement. It might win an election here by 1 or 2%, but it's certainly not the path that we can take to get back to being a political majority in our societies.
May I a question?
Yes.
If you compare the Democratic Party with the parties in Sweden, which are they most like?
I would say, given that we have two parties and a strong but diminishing tradition of anti-socialism in the United States, which is diminishing, thank God, especially amongst young people who grew up after the Cold War and aren't susceptible to the same kind of anti-communist rhetoric that has driven American politics for a long time. But given all of that, I would say that the Democratic Party would start on the sort of, you could say, pragmatic or reformist elements of the left party and then encompass all the way through, certainly the Social Democrats, the liberals, probably part of the Center Party, and then even into, I would say, 10 years ago, parts of the moderates. I think the moderates have shifted to the right in a way that would no longer be true. But it would encompass a very, very big swath of Swedish politics. There are lots of people who are, if you plucked them out of American politics and put them in Swedish politics, that could land in any number of parties. Does that make sense? Okay. So, look, we've been talking a lot about a movement and as a set of political parties, as a political family, about populism. But I would submit that populism isn't really the problem. I think a little bit of populism would be a good thing. Going out and talking broadly in big picture about big problems, about big ideas, talking about things in a way that actually resonates with people's lives, that's about, their fears, their hopes, their insecurities, their concerns. That's populism, and there's nothing wrong with those things. What is dangerous, though, very, very dangerous, is what I would call anti-politics. These are the arguments that say we can do a shortcut around the difficult work of political debate and discussion and compromise. That if we elect this one guy, he's just going to fix everything. He's going to come in and fix it. He may be left, he may be right, but the force of this guy's personality is going to fix everything. And I'm saying guy and man advisedly or intentionally, because it usually is a man, right? It usually is a male figure that's going to come in and use their strength of individual power to fix everything. And it's about destroying or undermining political institutions and democratic institutions. That is the element of so-called populist parties that worries me the most. Not making big promises, not exciting people, not trying to change things, but this idea that we can change things by avoiding politics. And this is why we talk about populism as if it's an extremity of left or right? When do you hear parties get described as populist? It's always a far-right party, right? Sweden Democrats, or a far-left party like Syriza. But the fact is, there's a tremendous threat from centrist populism. You know, when Arnold Schwarzenegger went to France to meet Macron and they had this little love fest and they were hugging and talking, it really reminded me, like, yeah, these guys are the same. Both of them come out and say, you know what, the left-right spectrum is broken, politics are broken, parties are broken, vote for me, and again, I'm going to just cut right through all of that and fix it with just common sense. But when they get into office, when you actually see their program, it very clearly has an ideological direction, right? Both of these guys went to war with the labor movement, right? I mean, Macron is right in the middle of it, and this was Arnold Schwarzenegger's like big political agenda in California, was to break the power of the trade unions. They have a politics, and they hide behind saying they don't have a politics. This, to me, is the biggest danger that we face. Are people going to voters and saying, we're going to just avoid all of these historic conflicts, it doesn't matter anymore, I'm just going to fix it by moving forward. Neither left nor right, but forward. Basically, anytime anybody says that, you should know they're full of shit. So, I've sort of outlined all these challenges, these problems, doom and gloom and so forth. So how do we think about moving forward? I think that we need to go back to reminding ourselves of what parties are, that they are, at the end of the day, not for the politicians, and they're not for abstract ideas. They're for regular people to get power in politics. And from there, we can learn a hell of a lot from social movements, from social movement attitudes, social movement approaches, social movement style. Parties should become more like movements. They should be bold in how they articulate their policy proposals, how they articulate their politics. Should be inspiring and values-driven. We should be talking about our vision for the world and what that means for regular people. We should be doing distributive campaigning, right? One of the greatest innovations to come out of the Howard Dean and then Barack Obama and then Bernie Sanders campaigns in the United States is this model of campaigning that really empowers the grassroots. Right? So instead of having to come into the party headquarters to get your leaflets to go out and campaign, you can be at home and use an app to get a bunch of friends to your house and campaign together as a little team. This empowers people out in the grassroots of the party and allows people to feel like they have some ownership over the campaign. They're part of it in a meaningful way, not just soldiers. It also means putting a real emphasis in developing leaders. This is the big, this is a lot of the core of the work that I do with social democratic parties is training folks and doing strategic planning to reorient the party's work towards building new leaders. Right? Not just recruiting volunteers to go and do the work, and not just recruiting people to be candidates or party officers, but to be leaders in their own community. Give them the tools and the support and the training and resources they need to be leaders. It also means rethinking some of our structures, right? Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, okay, we're just gonna, like this party in Denmark, the alternative, which basically runs on no program and then says, go on our website and tell us how we should vote and tell us that's nonsense. You gotta have structure. But that structure shouldn't strangle innovation and it shouldn't strangle new ideas from our membership. We should be fluid and flexible in how the party is structured. And for the movement side, for folks who are like, I hate political party work, I just want to do movement stuff, I just want to organize around my issues. The case we need to make to those folks is like, look, at the end of the day, in government, there really are teams, and it really makes a difference who's in government. It's a different kind of society when the left is in charge than when the right is in charge. And at the end of the day, we have to win those elections. So it's great to be out in the streets. It's wonderful to go out into communities and organize people. It's great to bring up new issues. But if at the end of the day, we can't coalesce that, we can't bring that together into an exercise of political power in an election to put better people in office, it really is all for naught. It really goes away and disappears. We need social movements to think more like political parties. We need political parties to think more like social movements. And if there's any place in the world, where that synthesis can happen in a really concrete way, it's here in Sweden. And so I'm very glad to be here with you. I'm very glad to share these ideas and to continue this discussion. Thank you very much.